Assalamu alaikum ji. Welcome back to another episode of Kahe, Kazi. My guest today was Isma Khan, behavioral analyst, entrepreneur, and business owner. We get to speaking about autism and how it affects children, what the implications are for the parents, how to educate them, and how to manage it. Enjoy. 3, 2, 1. Isma Khan. How you doing, Isma?
Very well. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. We were speaking about how you hosted a show on Dawn for two months. How was that?
Good question.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you kind of how it happened.
All
So one day I was invited as a guest on Chai Toaster Host,
ठीक है.
which is a dawn morning show with Dino and Iman, and they brought me on the show to kind of raise awareness about autism, which is the kids I work with. And so I go on the show, and they're live callers. And what happened was they ended up receiving a lot of live calls. So once the show ended, the CEO of came down and he said, you know, and I don't know him, and he came down and he said, there was so many callers and I want you to do a show. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, there's so much demand and I think I'd love for you to have a segment on our channel. And I said, okay, Urdu or English? That was my first question.
Yeah.
And he said, well, it's predominantly going to be in Urdu. And I said, well, considering I've moved back after over 15 years, I'm not too confident with Urdu. So if I could kind of co-host it with one of your hosts, I'd be happy to. So then essentially what happened was, and Dino and I hosted it together. And it was every Thursday morning for 1 hour. I think it was 9 to 10, and it was very cool being behind the screen and learning about how shoots happen and camera and where to look. And it was actually a very entertaining experience because we'd all have earpieces as hosts, and sometimes in the background the media, the guys with the cameraman and stuff might crack a joke or something, and you have to keep this really serious face with your guests. But yeah, it was great. I had a lot of I got parents, I got a client to come on, I got other professionals in the field, and we discussed various topics. So I came up with all the content, I arranged all the guests, and I'm hoping it raised more awareness in Pakistan. That was essentially the goal. So it was a very cool experience.
But do you figure that the response was good just by the numbers and stuff?
Well, I mean, in terms of, I never actually found out what the figures were in terms of the viewers, etc. But what I found was there were a lot of live callers, and there were a lot of people who were watching the videos and putting comments on YouTube. And I have a Facebook page as well, whereby the videos were put up and people will be commenting there. So there was definitely a reach. To what extent, I'm not sure. But I definitely do think that people did tune in to watch. And you know what? I believe that even if it's just a couple of people who've learned or who've called in and realized, oh, actually, my child might be autistic, for me, I've achieved.
That's more than enough, yeah.
Because it's a raindrop effect, right? One person, 2, 3, 4, and essentially then the word spreads.
Absolutely like that. So, behavioral therapist.
Yeah, so
right?
To be a bit more technical, it's board certified behavior analyst. So behavior analyst.
Okay, behavior analyst.
Yeah.
And you specialize in learning or so development impaired children?
Well, I specifically focus on children with autism.
Okay.
And uske alawa, I also work with children with developmental delay, speech delay, global developmental delay, some kids who just have some certain behavioral issues. I've also done workshops and talks with families of Down syndrome children. But autism is the main focus.
Okay. How when you begin to explain to people, because I did remark before we started recording कि यहाँ पे ऐसे होता है कि if say खुदा न खास्ता if your child has autism or whatever else, खुदा का कहर है, you know,
right.
I've been cursed by God.
Yeah.
He wasn't happy with me or something like that, right?
Right.
So how do you then approach just the education of that? कि ऐसा नहीं है.
Right.
It's just an illness, like a flu is an illness, right? So you just manage it.
Right. So the first thing I always tell families, because yes, a lot of what often happens, particularly in our culture, could be किसी ने बद्दुआ लगा दिया होगा, या you know मैं कुछ गलत किया था तो karma या जो भी है. But I always explain, I say that It's nothing to do with that. Actually, in reality, autism itself is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it's caused by there's a lot of research that's happening about the causes, which are still unknown, but they've definitely detected that it's related to genetics and the biology and the neurons in the brain. And I always explain to them, I said, it's nothing to do with that. Your child is born this way, and it's due to the biology of how their system works. And then they think that, oh, there's nothing, there's no cure. They're in our country they say ye pagal hai,
Ji bilkul.
And then I say not at all. They're actually extremely intelligent. Just because they may not be able to communicate doesn't mean that they can't learn. They're very intelligent. It's about how you explain and show the world to them in a way that makes sense to them. So people are fairly receptive, because in the end, when they come and they talk to me, it's because they want help, right? So there's obviously some form of inclination for wanting to fix or work with their child. But I would say, honestly speaking, I don't hear too often this about the fact that it's a punishment.
And that's a beautiful thing, right? That means people like you are definitely having an impact, because whatever you're doing is working to some degree ke aisi cheezein nahi. Because the last time I heard this was 6 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Uske baad mere khayal mein khair nahi hoga inshallah.
Yeah.
So how do you then, because some of these kids, these are children, some of these children can't talk. They
Right.
can't. So how do you go about teaching them to speak, essentially?
Okay, so to kind of put it in a bit of a nutshell, so often when kids come to me, first of all, let me actually just kind of clarify what autism is, essentially. And autism is it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it is characterized by symptoms for which they're broken down into two categories. One of them is lack of social and communication issues, so speaking, developing relationships, communicating, expressing themselves. And one is that they may have sensory behaviors. So we have 5 senses: sight, touch, taste, smell, and hearing.
Yeah.
And sometimes what happens with these kids is that it might be particularly heightened or less heightened. So, for example, I've got kids who, there's some drilling going on in the next office and they close their ears, and it puts them into a panic. They can't handle it. Or, for example, if they hear the Hoover, then because they're too sensitive in their ears. And then some kids are visually sensory motivated, so they'll watch fans move and they look from the corner of their eye. So they have various sensory needs as well. So that's essentially what autism is in a nutshell. And so let's say I have a kid who comes to me, and by the way, autism is a lifelong condition. This is something I wanted to also say.
It's not something that you can cure.
There's no cure.
No,
there's
no
only
cure.
intervention,
Yeah.
and there's way to work forward. So if, let's say, a kid comes and they can't speak, I'll first see, can this child make random vocalizations? So can they do ah, ooh, ee, ba, ba? What are the random sounds they take out on their own? Then I'll see whether if I said ooh, will they copy me? If they copy me, that means that I can get their speech in my control, which means all children learn through imitation. So if I say ooh, they'll say ooh. Then if I said bubba, they'll say bubba. Then if I said push, then they'll say push. So that means they can imitate me. But if they don't have that imitation repertoire, then and there are very few sounds, I'd often start with sign language.
Sure.
So sign language is when you kind of use your fingers to ask for things. So they'd kind of sign puzzle for puzzle, or water for water, or chip for chip. And what happens is that there's an entire teaching process that goes on. But when you're constantly repeating the word and you're signing it, and they're associating this with getting a chip, then that's where the vocalizations sort of start to develop. And then you kind of bring their speech in your control, and then you kind of move on to speech. But it's not guaranteed that all kids will speak, but that's the technique we use. And alhamdulillah, I would say over 95% of the kids who've come to me mute are not talking. So.
Yeah. And I suppose the goal is more than for them to speak, the goal is for them to communicate.
Right.
However they can, just
sure.
to relay their feelings and their thoughts. So 2 years now you've been here.
Yeah.
What was the impetus to start this? So you said you've been abroad most of your life, right? Get this education.
Right. Yeah. Well, so basically the reason actually behind this is because of family member my uncle's child is severely autistic actually, and I've grown up seeing him and seeing how he struggles to communicate. And he basically, it was very interesting because when he was born, he and when he was about 1 or 2, he'd say words like water or anda or things like that, and then his speech just went. And over time, and then he started walking on his tiptoes and flapping his hands, and he lost his speech.
Wow.
And I saw what his parents went through and how difficult it was, and what few resources were available here. And this is talking maybe 17, 18 years ago. And I used to spend time with him, and I've always loved children. And I'd sit and I'd play with him, and I found he responded to me. And then I didn't think too much of it. I went to university, I studied psychology, and then I stumbled across a job in London whereby actually very cute story, but this was something that really impacted me. When I worked in this little school for children with autism, we did ABA, behavior therapy, which is what we do. And I had a kid, and he didn't understand the concept that when he wants your attention, he has to say your name. So what he did one day was, when I was in the playground with another child, and he wanted my attention, and I didn't know. And I hear someone from the back saying, "Hi, hi," and I look, and I'm like, "Oh, it's you." And he basically mimicked my tone and the way I say hi to him every single morning he came to school. And that's what his understanding was. And then I worked in London, and then I came back to Pakistan, and I used to see how things are done here, and I realized there's so much need. So then I pursued it, and I came back, and here I am 2.5 years later, worked out of the house, opened a center, and alhamdulillah.
So this is you said this is also your second year, inshallah, going to be your second year in the center.
Going to be the second year in the center, and I've been in Karachi for almost 3 years now.
All right.
Yeah.
Are there requests, because this is such a specialization, right? And I would assume there aren't many people like yourself who specialize in autism like you do. ऐसा कभी होता है कि, so you're in Karachi, say someone from Hyderabad, someone from Lahore, do people get in touch?
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow. So, I mean, when I moved back to Pakistan, and with the qualification I have, which is BCBA, Board Certified Behavior Analyst, there was no other Pakistani based in Pakistan. There are Pakistanis abroad who visit, but there was no one based in Pakistan at that point in time. So then the demand from all over Pakistan has very much been there. And I, in fact, went to Pindi, and I conducted a 40-hour training there as well. So as far as Pakistan as a whole is concerned, absolutely. People from all over all over the world, a lot of families who felt there was no service here have gone abroad, but now they know that we're here, so they want to come back. And they only went abroad for their kid, but now they know there's services locally, so they want to come back.
And that's a beautiful thing, right? That's a beautiful, that's wonderful. So speech therapy, play therapy?
Well, in behavior therapy, a lot of our teaching is done through play.
Okay, all right.
I wouldn't say it's called play therapy per se, but yes, it's called, in a way, it is play therapy, because what is play? Play is when a child plays with toys and explores their natural environment. And so through that natural environment, we teach them how to communicate and ask for things, because the basic human necessity is asking for what we want. And so through play, essentially, we teach them to ask for, whether it's ball or chip or chocolate or water or whatever. So there is definitely an overlap, but all therapies, speech therapy, occupational therapy, they're all different, and they all cover different parts. Behavior therapy. Yeah.
So what we're saying is, I've read this somewhere, that there are 9 dimensions of intelligence. Right. So there's tactile awareness, there's calisthenic awareness, there's obviously the ones that we know, which is IQ, which is intelligence quotient, and then there's the EQ, which is emotional quotient. Essentially, then what you've explained to me now is that a child with autism maybe isn't smart in the classical sense.
Sure.
Where he won't be able to write an essay.
Fine. Right.
But because there's 9 dimensions, he might actually score off the charts on some of the other dimensions. Right?
100%. In fact, so some kids on the spectrum, because autism is a spectrum, it can be anywhere from high functioning to low functioning to the moderate. They're called savants, and they're basically highly intelligent.
All right. Wow.
Like, for example, they say Einstein was a savant, autistic. Wow. He was incredible at maths. So basically, there are definitely children who are incredible at art or incredible at numbers, and you have to just find that ability. I mean, I've got some kids who are very flexible, so I told the mom, I said, you should take them to gymnastics and explore what their ability is. I once came across this little child in London, and when I told him my date of birth, he would tell you what day that was in the year. Just
Wow.
randomly. Like if you said whenever your birthday is,
Yeah.
he'll say you're born on a Thursday. And he was right.
That's awesome.
So they have incredible abilities, whether it's art, drawing, anything. So yes, it may not be the generic writing an essay or whatever it may be, or doing incredible math calculations, but they have their own abilities. Yeah.
But I think then the goal, जैसे आपने अभी बोला with gymnastics and stuff, the goal would be कि आप उनके वालिदैन को you tell their parents or you tell who are the guardians, you tell them to foster their learning and direct it towards their skills. ये आपका नहीं है?
It might be mine.
Yeah, but it's probably yours.
I'm very sorry.
It's all right.
I
It's all
didn't
right.
think I switched off.
It's
my
okay. It's
phone.
okay. Yeah, no problem. We're just all so confused. नहीं.
We keep looking at each other.
No, it's fine.
Sorry, go
no,
ahead.
it's okay. Yeah, so how would you then go about, because it's basically putting a positive, it's basically shifting a paradigm, right?
Right.
Where the parents are going to understand this as an illness. And you're essentially telling them, theek hai, you could understand that as an illness. Or you could think that they just have a different set of abilities.
Absolutely. I'll
Right?
say they're different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would you then go about, because it is still, it's quite an impairment. Autism is quite an impairment, and it's going to be challenging for the parents, for the guardians, for everyone else. Right?
Sure.
And the kid is not going to have a normal life, right? Whatever normal is.
Fine. Yeah.
But so how do you then go about shifting the paradigm for the parents? Because from what I understand, your job has as much to do with the kid, as much to do with the parents as it does with the kids, right? So how would you go about doing that?
I mean, in terms of, so to clarify, would you basically how to help parents understand that their child is actually different and not.
Yes.
So I mean, essentially, what I often tell parents is that, look, all children are different. Typical children, non-typical children. All human beings will present a challenge. Whether your child is typical and goes to school but lacks focus, whether they're very naughty in school, whether they're easily distracted, whatever it may be, all children present issues. And I say, okay, well, for your child, they present issues in the sense they lack communication and they have sensory issues, and that's okay too. You just have to find, and I work with them to help them find a way around it, such that we make the child comfortable and we allow the child to feel that they are understood. I think one of the biggest problems is parents are they're so like proper and particular about the fact that their child shouldn't look different because they flap their hands in public, or they scream out of the blue, or they walk on their tiptoes, and there's this image consciousness situation going on, which is honestly quite sad, because I feel like the more parents who feel this way, who then hide their children, the less aware our society is. So then I explained to them that, number one, it's not about you, it's about them. Because you know how the world works. They know how the world works in their own way. So you need to go into their world and understand how they understand the world, and then teach them accordingly. And so parents do that understand, and what eventually happens is when the child feels understood by their parents, they automatically calm down, they become less aggressive, less frustrated, and then therefore the parents respond more positively. But honestly, I think a lot of it is to do with mental blocks.
Sure.
So they think, बच्चे को स्कूल जाना ही है, and I'm like, but आपका बच्चा एक कुर्सी में 15 मिनट या 20 मिनट के ऊपर बैठ ही नहीं सकता. उनको instructions follow करना, they don't understand. So to go to school, they need to have certain prerequisites.
Sure.
But because parents want to believe that, my child is okay, I send them to school, but really, is it benefiting them? You want to, consider that again.
Sure, of course, yeah.
So that's a different form of challenge, and it's also something which I understand, but it's all about trying to educate parents, because they're the key people in the picture.
Yeah, sure. But so have you been frustrated? Has there been a point where, because theek hai, yes, you're educated, and yes, this is your specialization, but we're known in Pakistan. We're known to be quite deep, right? We're known to be know-it-alls and stuff. So has there ever been a point where you've thrown your hands up and been like, "Yeah, matlab, this person simply won't listen"?
You know, honestly, it's funny. I've had it's a very I've touched wood. Alhamdulillah, had amazing clients. There have been a couple of challenges here and there, which is absolutely fine. I think that comes in every job and every career. But I would say overall, when I explain this to the parents, they understand. But yes, definitely there are times where it is frustrating, whereby because then there comes scheduling issues as well, whereby they want their child to come at a specific time post school. But then at that time, the slots are full. And then I'm like, but why are they even going to school? They could benefit so much more if they came here in the morning, and we give one-on-one therapy. So we work purely on their skill set and nothing. There's no other kid. It's just therapist and child in our team. So yes, at times it can be a little bit frustrating, but there's never been a point that I'm like, no, I'm gonna give up. I try my best to explain it to them, and then I guess what ends up happening is we find a compromise somehow. So if I can accommodate, great. And if I can't, then unfortunately, we may just reduce the amount of sessions we conduct with that client. But otherwise, it's been okay.
Allah khair kare. And you've mentioned this twice now, so I suppose I will just ask. You said they walk on their tippy toes. Do you know if there's a reason?
Some of them do, not all. Some of them do. The reason is because what happens is that they get the way their foot and their muscles are developed, some kids may find that comfortable. The sense and the sensation of putting their foot flat on the floor is not comfortable for them. They don't like that contact. So then they walk on their tiptoes. And then what happens, like for example, the individual in my family who has it, he walks on his tiptoes. And if we say, put your feet down, he'd put it down. And then we'll say, walk. And he'd walk 2-3 steps. But then he was like, it's so uncomfortable, he puts his foot back up. Because what happens is that the muscles then develop in the way to walk on tiptoes.
Sure.
And it's more to do with the way the muscles are developed and a sensory issue, the contact of the foot with the ground. So it's also could be a sensory issue. And that's sometimes why they do that.
So when you obviously conduct aapki apni therapy jo hoti hai with the kids, that's also holistic in a sense, right? So you're obviously working on psychosocial, psychosomatic, you're thinking about the body, you're thinking about it's all of those things.
Well,
right?
I mean, see, so when we're talking about behavior therapy, and this is something obviously very important, is that a lot of people come to me saying, oh, mera bacha rota hai, my child cries, my child hits, my child doesn't do their work, what do I do? And they think that's all that behavior therapy does. But actually, in reality, behavior therapy, or ABA therapy, applied behavior analysis, which is the therapy we use, encompasses all human behavior. So eating, feeding, communicating, hand washing, toilet training, hitting, biting, everything comes under behavior. Now, when it comes to, for example, a lot of these kids have eating issues. They don't like certain textures in their mouth, and therefore they only like to eat a specific thing, like maybe pish-pash, soft things, and nothing else. So that's where the speech therapist will come in and work on the muscle movements. We wouldn't cover it so much. In terms of behavior, we would try and maybe desensitize them. So I might say, and in fact, I just did this with a client, whereby this child only eats Cerelac, nothing else. So then I said to the client, mash, let's say, a vegetable that's a similar color into it. It was cauliflower. So she blended it all together and the child ate it. So that's getting him, the child got the vitamins, but also you kind of blend it in, and then you slowly you take it from being too mushy to slightly hard, and you're gonna get them used to that texture. So we do work on aspects of what you said. We work on socialization, we work on communication. The most important thing is when these kids come, they often can't communicate, which is where the behavioral issues comes in, because they're frustrated. So then a lot of our work is actually on communication. The physical aspect of whether they have sensory needs, auditory, or in their muscles. Some of them have weak fine motor skills and stuff. That's covered more from occupational therapists. So I think generally a multidisciplinary approach is best for such children, but not all children need all therapies. Some just need ABA, some need ABA in speech, some just need ABA in OT. So it kind of varies.
All right. Does it take a toll on you? Because you see, these are kids, right?
Yeah.
And me personally, I just don't have the stomach for it. If you show me a baby, if you show me a kid, immediately I'll start crying, I'll start tearing up. मेरा बहुत मतलब एक अलग ही मसला है. तो
no, what is that about? Why does that happen?
I don't know. I just I see a kid, Like in a movie or wherever, you show me a kid and something bad, there's indications that something bad might happen, I just start losing it, because kids are our future. They're the reason why we're all here, right? So I suppose the question I'm asking you is like, does it take a toll on you? Like, because these kids are misunderstood, and the muashra isn't the best place for people with special needs. It's just not, right?
Yeah, actually, so when I started and I worked in London in a school, and some of these kids can be self-injurious, so biting off their hands, banging their heads on the ground wall. And when I first saw this little girl just lose control, and she just like bite and just completely lose control and be so frustrated, I actually started crying because I was like she wants to say something and she can't, just for the fact that I can say, or if I said I want water, we're so lucky. Alhamdulillah. And so it upset me a lot. But then over time, as you kind of start to work with them, you realize that if you teach them the appropriate way of communicating, all that goes down. So and I'm never exhausted, or it's never tiring. I think when you love what you do, it's just alhamdulillah, it seems manageable, and when you see the results, it's so worth it. Like, it's rewarding for you that you just keep going.
Yeah. And the frustration for the child is almost always the lack of the ability to communicate. Is that what it is more often than not?
Yes, usually. So imagine you go to a foreign country and they don't speak English.
Wow.
And you try and communicate.
Yeah.
How would you do that?
No, I don't know. I would use sign language, or I don't know.
Right, exactly. But let's say you don't even know what to do with your hands, then what? You're going to be like, I just want water.
Exactly.
How do you tell them?
Exactly, right? Yeah.
So that is what happens. So it's very often related to the fact that they cannot communicate. Yes. And maybe they're feeling pain, or maybe they're trying to tell you something, they're thirsty, they're sleepy, whatever it may be. So usually the frustration and the behavioral issues stem from lack of communication. The moment communication modes are introduced, behavior goes down. It's correlated.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And do you ever consider prescribing medication or anything like that?
Well, good question. So many children with autism have other issues. So it's called comorbidities, which means there's two or more diagnoses happening. So many of the kids with autism have ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which are kids who are either hyperactive or lack attention, focus. Some have epilepsy with autism. Some have anxiety. So what often happens is that children who have ADHD and autism, and they have severe ADHD as well, which means they're very hyper and they cannot focus, for them, medicines are prescribed sometimes. I don't prescribe medications, nor do I do diagnosis. That is the role of a psychiatrist generally. Psychologist or psychiatrist, they diagnose, and psychiatrist prescribes medicines as well. And there's a medicine called Ritalin, which is used for children with ADHD to help them focus. I'm not a big medicine fan, to be honest with you. I believe it should only be used if it's really necessary. And because first you want to see, why is the child not focusing? Maybe you're forcing them to do things they just really don't want to do. If they're focusing on something that they love, the focus is there, really.
Exactly.
So is it that they're just unable to control their hyperness, or what is it? And therefore I always say, try and see what all you can do, exhaust all avenues to make sure you know they can focus. And if they really, really can't, then perhaps you could consider medication.
Well, yeah, don't look for a quick fix. ऐसे कोई एक आप shortcut दे दो, गोली दे दो, फिर ठीक हो जाएगा. ठीक नहीं होगा कुछ भी ऐसे. What then? Now this is purely personal, but what then do you make of the colloquialism surrounding mental health, right? So जैसे जैसे ज़ाहिर है awareness बढ़ती है, the more cognizant or the more literate you become about things like ADHD, attention deficit disorder, or OCD, the more people begin to self-diagnose.
Right.
And the more they'll use it colloquially, they'll use it like, "Hi, yaar, my OCD is going crazy. Don't put that bottle over there." Like, you know what I mean? So what do you make of all that? And how do you maybe educate people into not, because अगर मैं ऐसा करता रहूँगा, eventually I'll trivialize something that shouldn't be trivialized.
Absolutely.
Right? It's something serious.
Absolutely.
So how do you without sounding like an old auntie or whatever, right? Because you're like, Isma doesn't have any fun. Like, what's wrong with her? How do you educate people into essentially not using colloquialisms like that? How do you do that?
I mean, to be honest with you, I think, so obviously having done psychology as well, so I've studied all of these different, and I think it's very easy to self-diagnose.
Sure.
In fact, that in itself is a disorder.
Sure, all right. Really? What's the disorder?
I don't know, I forgot the name, but it's actually, it's called something whereby you just always think that that's what you have.
That's
I
crazy.
guess it's kind of related to even being a hypochondriac, whereby you keep believing that you're ill and then you actually get ill. I mean, it's a bit different, but yeah, I think it's an actual disorder whereby you keep diagnosing yourself.
Yeah.
But how would I tackle that? I would say that you want to consider it a problem if it really interferes with your day-to-day functioning. So yes, I mean, I'm not a big fan of when I see a painting that's tilted. Yeah, I don't like it.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
But I mean, that's not OCD really, because I can handle it. Yes, it's bothering me. Yes, I want to change the angle, but I can deal with it. But some people just can't. Let's say if they're actually, if they have OCD, or even, for example, something like ADHD. People sometimes think that they have ADHD and because they get easily distracted, when in reality it's probably because it may not be bothered. So I would definitely say you try to I mean, if it's really interfering with your day-to-day functioning, then perhaps you want to get it checked out. Otherwise, if it's not, then it's not really such an issue. It's not such a big deal. And can I be honest with you? I personally believe everybody in life has multiple components of different mental disorders. Everyone has had moments of depression. Sure. Everyone has had moments of anxiety. That is the way life is. When it becomes a problem and an actual diagnosis is when it really interferes with your life.
So I suppose then what you would say is here's a metric of how much something should affect you, right, before you consider it a disorder, right?
Absolutely.
Like you said, OCD. If this painting was, if it was not straight, right, does it elicit a visceral, a physical response from me?
Sure.
Right? Something like that.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah. Because ये मुझे, same thing with depression, right? हाँ यार मुझे depression हो गई थी. But you're maybe trivializing that word because depression is an actual thing, and it's really problematic for people.
Absolutely.
And maybe trivializing it like that isn't the way to go. Where do you go from here? Alhamdulillah. Brilliant response so far, right? 2 years of brilliant work, alhamdulillah. Where, like, obviously 1,000 times more is needed, right? Sure. Where do you see yourself going after this? Like so obviously doing the good work that you're doing here.
Yeah.
What else are you working on presently?
So I think for now, what I'm really focusing predominantly on, I mean, as far as career is concerned, then there's obviously hobbies on the side. But as far as career is concerned, I'm focusing on expanding my current team. So I have a center, it's called iCare, I.KRE, and we've got a team of therapists. And so moving forward, where do I see myself? I see myself expanding in different parts of Pakistan.
Sure. And
having setups in different parts of the country. And working with various children and children from different backgrounds.
Sure.
Having a welfare system whereby children are sponsored for parents who cannot afford it. So I think moving forward, the goal is to be able to work with more and more children. I think that is essentially, and currently I see myself being based here. The opportunity to go abroad is there, but I think when you're one of thousands versus one of 5 or 3, the impact you can have is huge.
Yeah.
And so therefore I see myself being here and making as much of a difference to as many families and kids as I can in Pakistan.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. The impact you could have here would be astronomical. Any digital stuff? Any online stuff? Like because there's people who clearly can't afford it. They just can't, right? आप क्या करोगे उनको?
So actually, when I came here and I started working with kids, I realized that there are a lot of queries I get from people who are in different parts of Pakistan or very far areas, and they cannot visit me and they won't have access to me, or there could be financial issues. So what I decided to do was I started a Facebook page by Isma Khan-PCBA, and I started uploading different techniques that I use, whether it's imitation skills, short videos, capture the attention, teach a skill, and the educational videos, and the response was phenomenal. And so I used that then as a platform of just, and I'm constantly every day putting different videos of different techniques. And I have parents who are like, we've learned so much through your videos, and I've never met them in my life. And they're like, actually, our kid is talking now, or our kid is communicating now. And then I started an Instagram page. So that is also got a following. But wow, does social media have an impact?
Oh, yeah,
it is insane. I realized what an impact it really has. So that's really the honor, and I'm actually looking to launch a website very soon as well. Inshallah,
so
that is also in the pipeline.
Absolutely. So I suppose this is a good place to end the podcast. You said some children might not benefit from traditional schooling at all.
Sure, absolutely.
So unke liye phir do you have conventions in place at your center? Parents bring them into and.
Okay, so ideally, when ABA is conducted, which is the therapy we do, they say for the best results you should have like 40 hours a week, but it becomes financially very draining. It's not the most reasonable form of therapy either. So then parents send their child for 1 hour or 2 hours a day, and so it's not a school. It's basically like a center or a clinic, you could say. And what we do is we work on all the prerequisite skills a child would need at school if they're at that level.
Sure.
They're more advanced, so they're less severe clients, or we work on functional life skills, and we train parents. Training parents is very much part of the therapy, and then parents then implement it at home. So that is kind of what we do. We run the sessions. We work on goals that are important for the child, whether it's buttoning, whether it's requesting for things. We train the parents, and then essentially the parents then implement it at home. Because see, in a day they're 24 hours. So if they come to me 1 or 2 hours a day, there's not enough time. Time flies, so then the parents need to utilize the time at home.
Sure.
So yes, I definitely believe that not all kids should go to school, because to go in a classroom setting, they need to be able to have so many prerequisite skills, and if they don't have it, they're not going to benefit. So better to focus on their skill set and help them develop their skills based on what they're able to do.
Sure, and also there's always the fear that it might affect them adversely, because traditional schooling didn't do me personally any favors, but again, that's a colloquialism. Alhamdulillah, I didn't really have any problems. It might actually whatever work you're doing, it might actually affect them adversely. Aisa bhi to ho sakta hai na?
See, so what parents' biggest thing about sending their child to school is socialization.
All right.
That's where they want to go. But the thing is, so yes, by them not going to school, they're not getting that social environment.
Sure.
So therefore, you could call that an adverse effect. But then parents can work on socialization in other ways. So for example, I know COVID's currently happening, but they could do play dates with other kids. If they have other children in their house, we've joined families in Pakistan, kind of encouraging them to work towards an activity together. See, when they go to school, what happens is that the teachers may not necessarily be trained as to how to integrate this child with other typical children. And so therefore, the child is not really getting to learn about socialization because they're not being pushed in the right direction. So then I believe that then parents need to find other avenues out of a school setting to work on social skills. Otherwise, I wouldn't say there's any adverse effect by not sending them to school.
All right. And
yeah.
In the landscape of Karachi, which is where we exist, right?
Sure.
Which is in terms of, there's a few great private schools, very popular and everything. Which school do you think, or if there's multiple, that's great too, which schools do you think have a good special needs department? Well.
So there are schools that are so-called inclusive.
Sure.
Okay, so there's like the Learning Tree, which is inclusive. There's a school called Cornerstones, which is also inclusive. But can I be
inclusive का क्या मतलब होता है?
Inclusive का ये मतलब है जिसके बारे में I would love to actually talk about. So it's used very loosely.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think the meaning's really understood properly.
Sure.
Inclusive means when you take a child who is perhaps a little different and you include them in a setting with other typical children. So what happens here is they say they're inclusive and they take a child with special needs and they bring them to school.
Sure.
And they include them.
Okay.
Great.
All right.
But actually, an ideal inclusive model works like this. You got a typical school. I've seen this in Dubai when I was working in Dubai. So then you have a typical school, and then within that school you've got a section whereby they do ABA therapy and they have kids coming one-on-one therapy, and then they take that kid, they send them into the typical side with the other kids during music time or playtime or sports time, the stuff that the child will enjoy.
Sure.
So they get exposure with the other kids and in a setting that they enjoy, and then they kind of come back to their one-on-one therapy. So they've got, that's inclusion, because you're developing what the child needs to be worked on. It's not about putting them in a typical setting, but really they're not even at the level that the other children are at.
Sure.
So I think this is a big misconception here, whereby they say inclusive, and sure, they are inclusive, but really, is it benefiting the child? Not necessarily, because they don't really know how to include the child based on the child's ability. So yes, there are schools, and I think it's a great initiative, and I think it's important that typical children also get to see children who are a bit different, because
Sure.
I mean, growing up, when we would see a child who's different, we'd be like, why are they like that? But I think it's important for awareness. But in reality, schools really need to see, is this child at a level to be included or not? Because if the child can't communicate and they're put in a school where they're all children talking, they could be bullied, they could be ignored, they could.
Sure.
And then I have a parent who came to me and she said, the child just snatched the items from my daughter, and I and my daughter couldn't say anything, but in reality she was upset.
Wow.
So again, she's in a typical setting and she's included, but surely she would have been upset, but she didn't say anything, so she just let the other child take it.
Of course, and she can't. Yeah, she can't
Right.
say it. So again, there are inclusive schools,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But then there are mainstream.
Mainstream schools, there are special needs schools as
Yeah.
well, that exist too. And so there are a variety of schools over here, but I think in terms of specifically focusing on autism, there is definitely a huge lack of it. Yeah.
And would you be open to actually going to these schools and educating their teachers, maybe?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
I've done a lot of that.
All
so
right,
I've done
wonderful.
a lot of trainings. I've gone to Bayview High, and then I've gone to other various schools as well. I've trained resource teachers who are basically teachers who come with that child who's included in the school.
All right.
So they help that child whilst the main teacher runs the class. I've trained them. And I have, absolutely, because see what happens is teachers who work, let's say in a preschool, they may have a child who actually does have autism, and maybe the parents have not even picked up on it. So it's very important for teachers to know the signs of dyslexia, autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, whatever the issues may be. And so I've done a bunch of talks in these schools, and I think it's very important, because then if the school feels there's an issue, they tell the parents, then the parents can address it.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is awareness that is needed, and a lot more needed, but it's definitely growing, and people are very receptive to learn more about it.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
At least they're open to it.
Yeah.
With that, let's bring this to an end. It was wonderful having you, Isma. And
Thank you for having me.
of course,
Yeah,
and I hope you come back, inshallah, whenever you feel
Inshallah.
like it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Isma Khan, Kazi Akbar. Oh wait, no. You have to give your all your Facebook and Instagram now.
Okay. So basically, I have a Facebook page. It's called Isma, ISMA Khan, KHAN -BCBA. I feel like I'm doing an advert over here.
You are.
And then, so that's my Facebook page, and I have an Instagram page, which is Isma Khan BCBA, which you can follow. And the center name is I.care, for which the website's going to be released soon.
Inshallah.
So just if you want to ever have questions or want to reach out, feel free to message. Might take a bit of time to reply, but you'll eventually always get the reply.
Inshallah.
And yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
It's been wonderful to meet you.
Wonderful. Amazing. Assalamu alaikum.